Hi everyone. In this last module, module 6, our last module, can you believe it? Anyway, we're going to be exploring research designs. The question for each of us as researchers is, how can we best choose an effective research design for the question or issue we wish to explore in our research? And that's what we're going to be looking at throughout the module and certainly in this video. Your assignment during this module will enable you to explore in greater depth one research design or approach, as well as enjoy presentations by your colleagues who will be exploring the same or other research approaches. And you can get all of the details in the assignment description and have a look at the rubric as well. And if you have any questions, make sure that you ask. These approaches or designs are all legitimate and effective, but how do we decide which one to use? That's exactly the question that Noella Mackenzie and Sally Knipe explore in their paper. They're both academics from Australia who worked at the same university when they wrote this paper. Noella is now at Charles Sturt University and Sally Knipe is at La Trobe University, still in Australia, and I suspect still working together in some ways. But anyway, because this paper has been very helpful for a lot of people that are looking at research and the language around research. They begin by noting the confusion that exists, especially for beginning researchers, and to be honest, for all of us, about various terms and the gross misunderstandings that most of us are guilty of when referring to qualitative and quantitative research. And then they try to clarify some of the confusion that may exist around terminology. The video you're assigned features Michael Quinn Patton, who is a sociologist who specializes in the process of evaluations that are focused on their usefulness. I haven't got his picture here because you'll see him in the video, so I haven't included it here. He also has a particular interest in the potential of social innovation in unpredictable and dynamic social and political environments, and we can certainly relate to that. And I'd love to read some of his work in this area, actually, given the situation that we're facing in education these days. In this video, he takes on the connection between being a practitioner and a research scholar, the exact approach that we're using in the work that we're doing, and reviews some terminology we've explored before in the context of research design that will continue to deepen our understanding of these ideas, these key ideas, actually. Mackenzie and Knipe argue that the qualitative-quantitative debate that has gone on for well over half a century in education research and otherwise, it is an either-or mindset that causes confusion and false understandings of the complexity of research approaches. As we've discussed before, quantitative was preferred in the natural and mechanical sciences, and then with the emergence of the social and human sciences at universities, they then transposed these approaches to the human sciences. Over time, however, this proved unsatisfactory in many ways for the growing kinds of questions being researched in the humanities and social sciences, including education. So qualitative methodologies became a more legitimate approach in the human sciences. Currently, researchers often use mixed methods to explore research questions in the human sciences more fully by drawing on what both have to offer, often leaning more towards one than the other, for example, but still mixing those methods to give us a more kind of robust understanding of a particular phenomenon. However, while this broad characterization of research as either quantitative or qualitative is a common one, it's not a helpful one, as it doesn't attend to the overarching paradigms that shape what follows in the research process, and I want to talk about that here. So let's begin with understanding paradigms. Mackenzie and Knipe reviewed over 40 research texts and discussions of various definitions of paradigms. The authors propose that 4 paradigms predominate, but there are others that could be explored as well. And of course, if you think back to Guba and Lincoln, you'll see some significant similarities here to what Mackenzie and Knipe have done. This slide demonstrates some of the perspectives in the literature about paradigms that Mackenzie and Knipe found. For example, the theoretical framework is often discussed, but essentially what the author means is paradigm. That is, the choice of paradigm shapes the intent, motivation, and expectations for the research being undertaken. In fact, the authors argue that if the researcher has not clarified for themselves the paradigm that best suits their inquiry, there is no basis for subsequent choices about methodology, methods, literature review, and so on. In fact, as McNaughton, Rolfe, and Siraj Blatchford write, a paradigm encompasses a belief about the nature of knowledge, a methodology, and a criteria for validity. An analogy to the paradigm might be that a paradigm provides the epistemological and ontological lens that shapes how we view reality. And therefore, and I'll put reality in air quotes, and therefore the phenomenon that we're studying, how we approach learning, is shaped by that very lens. So for example, when I first moved to Victoria, I started noticing these kind of gray blobs in front of my eyes, and that was not something I'd experienced before. So I went to an eye doctor to see what was going on and found that I had cataracts actually in both eyes. And I guess it had been coming on for a while, and I'd probably been seeing differently for a while, but I just didn't recognize that something was, clouding my vision. So arrangements were made, and I had cataract surgery, one after the other, and ended up with new lenses in both of my eyes. And so I began seeing through a different lens. I began to see differently. And in a sense, that's what a paradigm does. It shapes what we see in particular kinds of ways. And I don't know whether that analogy will be helpful to you or not, but I've always found that kind of a useful way of thinking about what a paradigm does. Some of the most common paradigms are first positivist, post-positivist. And a positivist paradigm is deterministic in the sense that causes determine effects. So for example, if you lower the temperature to 0 Celsius, the effect will be that the water will freeze. A post-positivist theoretical framework means that theories do not exist in isolation and are fallible, so reality, in air quotes, is seen as determined until it can be disproven. So there is room for change as contexts change. So for example, post-positivists accept that water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, but that other findings are possible should the context change. Both are about explanation and confirmation of a hypothesis, so they're related in that way. Interpretivism, constructivism, and you'll often hear those words being bandied about similarly, actually. They have some slightly different meanings, but not terribly significant. So interpretivism and constructivism is about understanding of the human condition and social phenomena. From this perspective, reality, again in social quotes, is socially constructed. That is, we understand the world through the lens of our life world and experiences, our pre-understandings, what we bring to the experience that we're making meaning of. Interpretivists take into consideration perception and its role in shaping what we do and why we do it, for both the researcher and those who are being researched. The transformative paradigm comes out of a dissatisfaction with dominant norms that serve the interests of dominant social actors and the social, economic, political arrangements that maintain those forms of privilege. So in recognizing that, and you'll notice that none of the others do as a primary lens for looking at what you're looking at, the result is that the research within this paradigm leads to social change because you've opened up an understanding that wasn't there before, and that the hope is that will increase social justice. The pragmatic approach isn't committed to a particular philosophy or view of reality. Rather, the research problem itself is central. And how do we get things done efficiently and effectively is the question. So it's pragmatic. It's about getting things done. Much of the business literature, for example, is from this perspective. Okay, so then after establishing our paradigm, let's move on to methodology. Methodology, then, is an overall approach to research that is linked to the paradigm or theoretical framework. This is where the language can become confusing, as it's challenging to see how the various methodological approaches fit with one another within the paradigms. And part of that is because there simply are so many of them. So under positivism, post-positivism, you'll see a relatively small list of approaches. When we get to interpretivism, constructivism, I've put a few down, but there are many that you'll see. And sometimes you'll see combinations too between these. So the lines start to become somewhat blurred in some cases, not in every case, of course, but in some cases. So for example, in my own case, I did a study that crossed over between interpretivism and the transformative paradigm. Under the transformative paradigm, you see critical theory, neo-Marxist, and so on. We could go on and on here as well. There's a long list of approaches because of the various kinds of questions that people are asking, and the approaches that are necessary to be able, within the paradigm, the number of approaches that are necessary to approach those questions. And the pragmatic, there's kind of consequential approach, problem-centered approach, pluralistic, real-world practice oriented, etc. So these four paradigms then shape what follows. That is the methodologies that people use. So here we've got, here you would have an interpretivist, constructivist paradigm, and you might choose the phenomenological methodology. And the methodology is the frame of reference for the research, which is influenced by the paradigm in which our theoretical perspective is placed or developed. So it comes out of the philosophical understandings of that particular paradigm. The methods then, if the methodology is linked to the paradigm, then the methods are linked to the paradigm as well through the methodology. So I've indicated here on the chart where a methodology fits, and as you saw in the last frame, there are so many that we could put in here that I would have had to have tiny print for the rest of this. So I've left it as is. So here we have paradigm, methodology, and that methodology comes out of the paradigm. And then we have methods, that is your epistemological position. So here we're going to choose quantitative, if we're positivist, post-positivist. Qualitative methods that tend to predominate in the interpretivist constructivist paradigm. Qualitative methods with sometimes quantitative or mixed methods are used in the transformative approach or paradigm. And then we have the pragmatic, in which it's whatever works. So it could be qualitative, it could be quantitative, it could be, you know, any of those that we've talked about. So we have paradigm, methodology, methods, and then we have data collection tools. And these data collection tools come out of the method that you've chosen. So if you've chosen this paradigm, this methodology, this method, then you're going to use some of these. If you've chosen this one, you're going to choose some of these. And you will see, for example, when you look at this tends to be a favorite for a whole range of reasons for the MES program. So the methodologies may differ, but it's generally qualitative methods that predominate. Some quantitative methods may be used that might be available, for example, through the ATA or whatever, to kind of point out the issue that's being explored. And then that would be followed by interviews, observation, not all of these necessarily, but you might have a combination of interviews, observations, document reviews, visual data analysis, and so on. So this is kind of the trajectory. So let's look at that a little more closely. As the previous slide demonstrates, the tools follow on the methods. The reason perhaps that the language in research becomes quickly muddled is that as you're doing research, you tend to travel back and forth along this research trajectory. Research, while it may appear linear and all of the neat diagrams about the research steps to follow, is almost always, in my experience and the experience of everyone I know, quite messy. And it often remains that way throughout. It's a constant process of checking, rechecking, does this work? Was my approach helpful? And so on and so forth. And depending on the answer to those questions, you may want to revisit some of these steps along the way and then shift your research accordingly. And in terms of data collection tools, they cross most of the boundaries. For example, interviews, surveys, etc. are used across paradigms, especially when mixing methods. Not necessarily the pardon me, the positivist methods, positivist paradigm, but sometimes in post-positivist paradigms. What's important to remember here is that when we talk about qualitative or quantitative research, we are focusing on the methods and leaving out a great deal more that informs our choice of methods. The area of inquiry that we begin with, the research paradigm in which we are operating, and the methodology that responds best to our area of inquiry, all of that's left out when we just simply say qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods. So when someone asks you what kind of research you're doing, you can answer, my paradigm is, and this would be an example, my paradigm is transformative. Pardon me, my methodology is feminist. And my methods are qualitative, using interviews, focus groups, and document analysis for my collection tools. So that gives us a much broader way of thinking, from the philosophical to the very practical, all of what's involved in doing your research. So at the risk of beating this to death, let's just look at this once again. Your research is nested in a paradigm that informs the methodology, methods, and tools that you choose to comprise a systematic and defensible approach to your research. That is, as Patton suggests, you paid attention systemically. That is, you've developed a clear understanding of and followed through on each level of the research process in order to understand and make a difference in an aspect of the world in which you are engaged. And you can answer the epistemological question, how do you know that you are doing good as a practitioner or as a researcher? So I hope that this video ties together many of the aspects of the course into a more cohesive conceptual bundle that you can take with you when you're working on your assignment, and more importantly, when you're doing your research project. I want to wish you all the best in your research journey, and if along the way there's any way that I can help in the future, please don't hesitate to ask. I don't want to step on the toes of anybody who is working with you. But if something comes up and you think, we talked about that in 510, and I wonder if Janice could add something here, yeah, I'm always happy to do so if I'm at all able to do so. So it's been a pleasure to be a part of your research journey. You have some very exciting days ahead, so I want to wish you all the best.